we're going to see there's a bunch of levels of negotiation here. Number one is we have to get a price the bank will accept. So the bank says, well, our BPO says 150. We're going to need at least $120,000. Okay, fine. So we go to the seller, right? Seller, can you come up with 20 grand? The seller looks at you crazy and goes, if I can come up with 20 grand, I'd be paying my mortgage and I wouldn't be doing the short sale. All right, let's go to the buyer, okay? Mr. or Mrs. Buyer, will you pay another $20,000 for this property? I thought I had a great deal at $100,000. That was a great deal. I guess $120,000, it's still a pretty good deal. Okay, but no more. I'll do the 120, but no more. Okay, fine. So you've now come up to 120,000. All right. We go back to the bank. Fine, we'll accept 120,000. You figure, wow, I got this place for 120,000. Still 30 grand better than I would be getting anywhere else. Life is pretty good. We're going to close soon, right? No, because the second level comes up. And the second level of negotiating is the costs. Obviously, there's various costs that have to be paid in order to do a real estate transaction. You guys have been through them before, and you've looked at the settlement sheet, and sitting at a closing with the lawyer, and they're pointing all these things out, and you figure out, oh my gosh, how are all these things, my responsibility, I have to pay for all these things. That's how everyone gets paid. You got lawyers, you got real estate agents, title companies, and probably most importantly, the city and the state and the county, and every other entity that's got a piece of action in the pie who wants money out of the deal. Okay? These things have got to be paid or you don't close. Well, you know that, and I know that. The banks don't care about that. So the banks will come back to us all the time and say, all right, we're okay with your costs, except we don't want to pay attorneys. Or we think your fees are too high. Or we don't understand this fee that's paid to the city of Chicago, so we're not going to pay it. Well, now look what happens. We have costs that need to be paid. So what do? Right? We go back to our seller. Mr. Seller, can you kick in another $5,000 for costs? I don't have any money. We go back to you guys as the buyer. You willing to pay another $5,000 to do this deal? And of course, you guys make a face, you kick and you scream, and ultimately you go, well, $125,000 is still better than $150, so okay, I'll do this thing. All right? Level number two. Now we have the price approved and the fees approved. The negotiator told me that's going to make it happen. Okay, great. We're going to close tomorrow, right? No. Because now the negotiator needs to go to the end investor. The end investor is typically going to be Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. Sometimes it's the bank itself. Sometimes it's some unknown entity of Wall Street investors. Okay? The investors, they've not done so well recently. They're not going to be happy when they're presented with a property that they loaned $300,000 on 5 years ago, and now they're being told they're only going to get $110,000. So they're going to look at the file closely. And a lot of times what happens with the investor is they'll come back and they'll go, everything you have here is fine. However, we think the seller should suffer more. So we want the seller to pay us another $5,000 in order to do this deal. So what do? Right? You guys know where I'm going here, right? We go to my seller and say, seller. Seller goes, go back to you guys as the buyer. We need $5,000 more. Where are we now? 125 plus 5, right? That's why I became a lawyer and not an accountant, because I can't do that in my head. All right, now you're going, 130,000 is still better than 150,000. Okay, you guys agree to do that. So now we're through the investor. If we're lucky, the investor is going to, within 2 or 3 weeks, whenever they get around to it, send us an approval letter, and we'd be ready to close. That would be best case scenario. But there's a few things that we have forgotten to talk about. One is, most people, up until recently, when they were getting mortgages, they weren't just getting one mortgage, they were getting 2 mortgages. So now what happens? We got our approval on the first lender. Everything's great, right? Now we have to go to lender number 2 and say, we need you to do a short sale. And lender number 2 is being limited because the first lenders will only allow $3,000 or less to be paid to the second lender. Well, if you're a second lender and you loaned out $110,000, or even if you loaned out $70,000 or $50,000, and you're being told, we need you to accept this deal, by the way, you're getting $1,800. And in fact, everyone else in the deal, real estate agent, attorneys, they're all making more than you on this thing. You're going to lose everything on this transaction. What do you think they're going to say? Right? So they come back and they go, we'll accept the $1,800 from the first lender, but we want $10,000 in order to close. So we go back to the seller. The money's still, I'm still broke. We go back to you guys. Let's say they only want $5,000. Make my numbers work a little better. We're at what, 130?
Yeah.
No, we're at 130? Well, now we're at 135, right? All right. You're still smiling, so that means that you guys are still interested in buying this place. Nobody's explained this to you yet, have they? Okay. So we're at 135, all right? You're still going to move forward because now you got lender number 1, you got lender number 2, everyone's on board. We can finally close, right? Nah, I see Bert shaking his head. No, we may have another challenge here. Here's the next challenge. A lot of times, lenders took out mortgage insurance policies or made the buyers take out mortgage insurance policies. The point of a mortgage insurance company was to ensure that if somebody went into default, went into foreclosure, stopped making payments, that there was this insurance that would actually pay the lender for their loss. Well, it sounded good for the lender, but these mortgage insurance companies, I think there used to be 5 major ones, I think they're now down to 2 because they all went out of business because they kept paying out and they weren't getting any premiums in. Okay? So the mortgage insurance companies now, if they're involved in the file, say, yeah, we're getting killed on these things. So we're okay with what you guys have done here, but guess what? We need $5,000. Okay. Seller? Buyer? Still smiling? All right. 5,000 tacked on, 140, right? Remember that great deal across the street for 150? How's that looking right now? Okay? So, we're through all of this. We're done with all these people. We have one final thing to deal with, and that is the issue of deficiency. When a seller is doing a short sale, and they sell property or goes into foreclosure, whatever it ultimately goes back to the bank is obviously less than what their loan amount was. That's a deficiency. 100,000, 200,000, whatever it is. Well, the banks are giving up on that money if they agree to waive it. We want them to waive it. Well, we meaning the sellers, right? Why would you want to do a short sale, go through all of that, and then still be on the hook for the rest of the money that you owe for the rest of your life? It makes no sense. So we try to get the banks to waive that deficiency. Sometimes they will, but guess what happens most times? Sure, we'll waive your deficiency. $5,000. Okay. Seller, buyer, you guys are up to $145,000 if you want to stick around in this deal. All right? Started off at $100,000, seemed really good. Now all of a sudden, we're 5.5 months later. We've had 5 rounds of negotiations, and you're paying $145,000. You could have closed on the place across the street for $150,000, and you would have been living there for the last 3 months. Okay? That's where things are and how it all happens. Now, they don't always happen like that. They don't all have second loans. They don't all have mortgage insurance. And they don't all require all of those payments along the way. But that is kind of a basic scenario of what can go wrong and what happens more often than not. And it's really not that friendly either. Because really what happens is sometimes the sellers will kick something in. Sometimes we go to you guys as the buyers and you guys go no. And then we go back to the bank or the investor or the MI company and tell them no. And sometimes they will agree to negotiate. Or sometimes